Hello and welcome to Fall 2025 and our class, The Psychology of Personality. My name is Dr. Mark Kavanagh and I'm your instructor for this course. And pretty excited to get the semester started here. Enough of this summer. Enough of that. Time to learn, right? Woo. Okay. So we start off, what you're seeing here is a feature of the course where every week, usually on Mondays, but class starts on Tuesday. So you're seeing this on Tuesday, obviously. Every week on Monday, I will be posting a brief video like this into the announcement section, the entry page right in the course. Please take the time to review this. I review the expectations for the course. I review if there's anything different I want you to do. Sometimes I'll do that. I'll say, okay, I'm looking at the assignment as I wrote it, and I'm thinking, based on what's going on in the world right now, let's shift this a little bit and have it go in a different direction. Now, my experience has been, because I can track how often this video gets watched, is that it doesn't get watched very often. But this is a really good time for you to know where I'm coming from. I'm going to talk about the content a little bit, maybe even get a little lecture like, and then I'm going to move into some descriptions of the assessments, the discussions, the quizzes, and the assignments. And sometimes I just chance upon a little bit more clarity with some of what I'm looking for. And so, certainly very much to your benefit to watch these videos. Now, this week we are tackling, of course, Chapter 1, titled An Introduction to Personality. What else would you title the first chapter, right? And we ask ourselves the question, what is personality? Now, in the world of psychology, there are certain areas that have always been of interest in psychology, and we're still struggling with how to define it. Now, my two favorite areas are intelligence and personality, both of which have a gazillion theories to describe them, and none of them are necessarily the whole picture. So we're left with different perspectives of what is intelligence and what is personality. Now, personality and intelligence are words that we use every day. They're in our common vernacular, as they say. We use this scientific word is now being used by regular people, so we say that person has a nice personality, or that person has an objectionable personality, or we have a personality conflict going on. And we use these words, yet even the field of psychology is, of course, still out. We're still defining what this is. Now, we have some great models. And what I think this course is going to introduce to you are the basic kind of stuff, the ways in which the big theories associated with the description and personality. There's lots of it. It's an open field of research, so don't feel constrained by this, but the tools that we're going to explore are fun, they're useful, they can really lead to a lot of introspection, understanding of how you interact with other people, how you deal with situations, how you deal with information, that kind of thing, how you're successful in the world, and when do you have challenges. So it's a really good opportunity for some introspection. And that's actually sort of my approach to teaching. If you've taken a class from me before, you know that a lot of my assessments have to do with you looking in the mirror, taking a test about yourself and tell me how that relates to, is that true? How do you relate to the results of this test? That kind of thing. So I'm going to be asking you to do that. And it's not a voyeuristic process. It's one that I feel is the best way to understand the test and the theory, is to see how it applies to yourself. You will also be able to apply it to other people, which is really great. And I really encourage you to take some of the assignments of this class and share them with your friends and family. And it just becomes really, really great discussion, really good points of discussion. Now, you will also see in this class is a review of the factors that influence our personality. Now, while there are some theories that pretty much say that our personality is hardwired into our brain. Lots of other theories that say, well, things happen in our lives and we make decisions in our life that change who we are. So basically, the nature nurture question when we know it's both. So there's theories on both sides of that line, but when we're going to look at some of those factors, and I'm going to have you reflect upon how these factors have impacted the way that you've constructed your own personality. Those factors include the psychodynamic factors, kind of the basic theory of personality that we have, culture, cognitive factors, experiences, important people in your lives, all of those things. And I, in my little list here, I wrote culture twice by mistake, but it was kind of a little slip there, a little Freudian slip. I think culture has a major impact on our personality, and culture is huge. So we're talking about values, norms, expectations, institutions such as the family, school, church, those kind of things, the government that we live in, the economic world that we live in, all of these impacting who we are in a very significant way. We're going to get into some personality testing when we look at, again, we look at intelligence and personality. These are the output of a change in the history of psychology and what we look at when we're started off, and we're still there. We start looking at what is common, how does the brain work, how does all that, and what makes humanity humanity. So how we are all the same, and then when we got into perception and intelligence and personality, we're looking at individual differences. How are people different? And so psychology has these two sides, has the side of understanding how we're all the same and then understanding how we're all different. And I think possibly that's why what really attracted me to the field of psychology was this kind of yin and yang sort of idea of the whole understanding of humanity is to understand how we're all alike and how we're all different. And so that's, to me personally, that's very important. Now, I mentioned the nature versus nurture stuff, the psychodynamics, culture, cognitive factors, people in your lives, experiences, economics, and all that that may have affected who you are. Enter in Chapter 1, Discussion A. There are two discussions this week. First discussion, I want you to share of those things. What do you think? Just one or two. Express to the class a factor around you that has impacted who you are. Pick one of those, the one that's most, like you might say, I grew up in another country that had a set of values and whatnot, and I've come to America, and those values are still a very big part of who I am, and explain why. So that kind of exercise. And then in a discussion, you can share with each other and comment on each other's perspectives on those things, particularly, well, when you share them and say, hey, I'm from, Skowhegan, and I have the exact same value system as you have from Kenya. And then, or you might say, well, I'm from Skowhegan, and my world has never really embraced that kind of thing. And I find that really interesting, just to examine the differences and get to know each other that way. Now, there's another question kind of related, but in this one, I'm asking you to look at your inheritance. So, Chapter 1, Discussion B, you're specifically looking at the people in your lives and comparing that with all of these other factors. So there's all these factors that influence us. That's discussion one. And then I'm saying, well, what about the inheritance? What did you get? Someone might come in and say, you know what, you were just like your grandfather, or something like that. And they'll say, oh, what about my grandfather? And the personality characteristics, or maybe you see those things, or maybe some of you, you've reached adulthood and you're like, holy cow, I'm more like my dad every day, good or bad. And so those traits, now the origin of those traits may be genetic, or they might be, well, the fact that you grew up with your dad, learned that stuff. But either way, looking at a comparison between things that were inherited versus learned from the environment. So there's two discussions. They're kind of related to each other. So you have those two discussions. Then there's a quiz. I introduced, you can look throughout the book, do a little scan of the book, looking at the basic ideas. You could even do this on the web. You could just look up personality theories, and a bunch of them are there. Maybe even much more than I cover, and go through them really quickly, kind of, this perspective versus that perspective, and share with me the one that you think is going to be the most difficult to get your head around. And it's like, no, I don't get it. I don't get it. Maybe it's psychodynamic, the id, the ego, superego. Maybe it's social learning theory. Maybe it's, the big five, or it's going to be the Myers-Briggs test that you take or anything like it. Just looking through those theories and go, this is the one that is going to be hard for me to kind of like integrate into my own understanding. The end of this class, what you're going to have is like a Batman's utility belt. All these ways in which you can look at personality, all of which are valid, even though some of them contradict each other. The wonderful, wonderful gray world of studying human behavior, psychology. So that brings us to the two discussions and a quiz. Now there's a final assignment. Now this assignment, the first kind of research assignment, you're going to see I introduce very early form of personality testing called projective tests. They're subjective tests, and often they're projecting. Now what those tests tried to do is they provide a stimulus for someone, and that person tells what they see or what they interpret from that stimulus, and an expert uses that information to understand that person's personality. Now, in the context of these tests, they were often using these tests to discover abnormal personality. They weren't looking for normal personality. They were looking for personality traits that were leading that person into trouble. They were getting into trouble because of those. So these tests were being interpreted and people were being diagnosed and whatnot. Now, these two tests are the Rorschach, the classic ink blot test, and the thematic apperception test, which is a set of pictures, kind of vague images that are going on, and the individual has to develop a story behind them. And how that story goes. Like if someone's depressed, they'll say things that are kind of depressing. If someone's manic, they'll say sort of manic things. If somebody's, you know, violent, they might see violence where other people don't. Those kinds of things is what that was for. Now these tests have for the most part fallen out of favor. I'm going to be asking you to do some research on the tests, where'd they come from, all that. What do you think about the test? And come up with a way that this test could be useful. Now, I do this assignment because I do a little bit of Jungian dream analysis. Now, in the world of psychology, dream analysis as symbolic representations of another world, a spiritual world, another world communicating and interacting with you and all that stuff is pretty well squashed. But engaging in that discussion is just the preliminary. It gives us something to talk about when I'm sitting with a client and they tell me what their dream is and I give them an interpretation on it. We launch onto some journey of discovery, and we have something to work with. It gives us something to start off with. And I guess my skill set has come to the point that I can usually come up with a pretty interesting, yet, according to those records, according to that theory, pretty valid interpretation of that, what that dream means. But it's an interactive process. The same with these. There might still be utility. If I show you an ink blot and you're like, I see a butterfly, and you're like, well, why do you always see butterflies? And off you go into some conversation. So maybe thinking about how could these tests still be used, even though they are still used, but not by very many people. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this chapter. So chapter 1, introduction to personality here. We have 2 discussions, a quiz, and an assignment. Not every week is like this, kind of a heavy load right at the beginning here. All these are due at the end of the week, Sunday at midnight. And so get right to her. So thank you for tuning in. Please tune in every week. I'll be here every week, same time, same channel. And have a great week, and I will be seeing you next time. Take care.